My name is Joshua, and I am the Tribune. Something that's really crucial that God's friends and his generals need to know about him is that he will not only equip you to advance mightily in major crisis, but he will actually expect you to have this mentality. While you are going through massive heartache, heartbreak, spiritual attack from Satan that's unusual, and crushing circumstances that actually are crushing everybody else around you, and would crush even you if you weren't friends with God. While you're in those situations, God will absolutely expect that you record his blueprints and start building his wonders and prepare with him and move forward with him and listen to his voice. Now, after we understand this about God's character, we have to understand how this is done. And this is something that I want to cover in this video because I have to. He's ordered me to. So the important thing to know is that most people don't talk about this because, number one, they don't do it themselves. Number two, they don't need it because they're not talking to God like that. And number three, they're oblivious to this level. But in this coming time, you need to be aware of this level of God, because when the enemy comes to you and afflicts you, you need to be prepared to search for this side of God's character and find it well. Now, I want to outline the exact practical understanding and the steps so that you can touch this and feel it. Because a lot of times when we get these principles, it's kind of like just up in the clouds where you're just like, you're just reaching and it's just nobody gives you exact practical information that you can actually do what they're saying and what God expects. So for this situation, when God expects you to build through crisis, it's important to know that he wants you to take your own temperature. Now, of course, I'm not talking about your natural temperature. That would be foolish. What I'm talking about is your spiritual temperature. Because the trick, when you're building with God and advancing with him in special things that even without the crisis, you wouldn't be able to do without talking to him and without hearing his voice and his instruction and his guidance, then you have to make sure that you don't even waste energy on falling into things like anxiety and fear. And these are the two things I'm really going to be focused on, because this is, you check your temperature because you don't want to fall into these things. Normally when you check your temperature in a natural sense, you're checking your temperature because you're already feeling sick and you probably are sick already. But in God's eyes, when he asks you to check your spiritual temperature and the Holy Spirit puts this on your heart, he's trying to save you from actually falling into the sickness. And that could be anxiety or fear. Those are the two things I'm really going to talk about right now, because we're going to really need this in these coming times. But he can do it with all these other, he can do it with lust, he can do it with pride, he can do it with anger, he can do it with a lot of things. So these principles, you should apply them to whatever you need. Now, I'm going to use this coming purging that he has ordered on the earth of people who are going to be removed because they are influencing the younger generations incorrectly and not giving them a chance to know Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. And he is removing so many people. His sword is coming through the earth. I want to use this as an example because this is what's about to happen. And this is what people immediately are going to be needing, these principles. So there's two kinds of forms of checking your temperature. The first is I'm going to talk about defense from things that are very negative from Satan, that he's going to try to bring you so that you crumble. Now, The first thing you have to remember in this situation is that when Satan brings things to you, I'm talking to God's generals and his friends, people who are moving forward with God and advancing in powerful things. He is not after your emotions. That's not what he's after. What he's after is what your ear is hearing from God. He is after your assignment. He is after your advancement in God's purpose. That's what he's after. He's after things like your peace, so that you cannot hear God. Because when you don't have peace, it's very difficult to hear God and what he wants. And it's very difficult to not only maintain something, but to build. It's very, very impossible if you don't have peace with yourself and with God. You need to have a quiet spirit. You need to not be frantic. So what God's going to ask you to do is check your temperature a lot. So the first thing he's going to do is he's going to say, you need to look around and see what kinds of situations make you feel a certain way and start leading you into that space. And he's going to expect you to see it coming before you go into that space. Because once you get into fear and anxiety, then you have to come out of fear and anxiety. And that takes energy to come out of it. So while you're coming out of it, that energy really should be spent on hearing God and moving towards what he wants you to move towards. So really, it's a waste of energy. So what God's going to do is he's going to start teaching you about yourself. He's going to say, listen, when your heart feels like this and when your spirit feels like this, it's a warning for you. And you need to pay attention to that warning, no matter what it is about, no matter what situation you're in. You need to pay attention to the warning and back out, no matter what. Now, when you're checking your temperature and you feel these ways, you feel this negativity, you feel it creeping in, it doesn't matter what you have to do to get out of it. I don't care if you're in an important meeting. It makes no difference. You need to leave. You need to check yourself. Because you holding that temperature check as priority is you holding God as priority. And that will make him very pleased because he's concerned about your well-being. And he's concerned about your relationship with him and you hearing him. And he's concerned about his purpose and his agenda and you keeping his schedule. So in this coming time, for example, when you see that people are dying all around you, it could be people you don't know, people you know. He will not stop building when that happens. He will not say, okay, now you need to just not hear me and just fall out on the floor. No, that's not what's going to happen. He's going to say, I understand your pain. I understand what you're going through. But your freedom and your healing is going to come through listening to my voice, checking your temperature, getting a relationship with me, and building and preparing. So what you want to do is you don't want to go too deep in an area that he doesn't want. Again, this could be with lust, this could be with anything. Because he's going to come to different people with different things that he wants you to check your temperature with. And so you should be checking your temperature, even if you think you should be checking your temperature all day, just in case. You should be always looking around you in situations and saying, is there anything in this space right now that I need to check before it even comes to me? This is what checking your temperature is. If you do this, it's not only impossible to fall into things like despair or anger and let that consume you. It's also impossible to not be advancing while you're in a situation like this. Because what you're doing is you're controlling how you feel about the crisis around you. You're keeping yourself level for a purpose. This is another reason why it's very important to hear God in general, because when he tells you things in advance about what's going to happen, it's not just so you could know about it. It's so you can start checking your temperature and start controlling your spirit, start managing your insides, preparing not only on the outside, but really preparing your insides. So when that crisis comes, or when that thing comes, you can actually move forward and advance in it, and you can have treasure coming out of it. This is the beautiful thing about our God. So when I talk about coming out of treasure, coming out of a situation with treasure that most people don't come out of with treasure, they just want to survive it. They're just happy to survive. No, I'm not just happy to survive, and you really shouldn't be either. You need to come out with some treasure. You need to come out with God's wonders. You need to come out with a relationship with God. That's what that, and how you get it, how you get those things is checking your temperature, making sure that you're guarding yourself from what is around you. Sometimes you're going to check your temperature from what's inside of you. You're going to look inside and say God has pointed something out inside of you that will block you. It has nothing to do with other people. It has nothing to do with what's around you. It's inside of you. And you need to check your temperature to make sure that it's checked. Because that's how God gives chances to stay out of certain situations. So do not be surprised when God has ordered a purging. And I'm talking about people. And people are falling and dropping like flies all around you. There's carnage all over the earth. Blood everywhere. And he says, you look at me. You need to check your temperature. I understand the pain. I understand what you're going through. I understand the fear. I understand the anxiety. I understand the temptation to fall out and crumble. But I expect you to listen to me, get close with me, and prepare and build. Because there's an afterwards. So in this situation, checking your temperature is you're guarding yourself from letting what's outside come in. Because Satan's going to come to you with this. And it will seem unbearable. But this is how you do it. You're always focused and always looking. While you're doing what you're doing, you're always paying attention to what's around you. So you don't wake up and open your eyes and you're in despair and you're not doing anything. You're just on the floor. This is what we don't want. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be heartbroken. God's not going to ask you to just don't care about that. No, you're going to feel it. But it's what do you do while you feel it? If you can't help it, then you could limit it. Some things you can totally avoid. Other things you can't. But either way, you need to check your temperature. If you can avoid it, you need to not even step in the door. You need to feel, that doesn't feel good. I'm not going in there. I'm checking my temperature all the time. And if this comes to me, it just overtakes me, I need to check my temperature to manage it and maybe even get out of it. Now, this brings me to my next group of people who they're going to deal with those things. They're going to have to check their temperature on that level. But they're also going to have to check their temperature on a very unique level. And again, I'm going to use this purging that God has ordered on the earth that's coming as an example. This new era that's about to dawn. It's coming. One of the biggest fears of God's generals in this coming time will not be what you would expect. When I talk about that God is going to be removing so many people from the earth who are not his friends and actually just don't even care about his purpose and are actually destroying the younger generations and not listening to God. When I talk about that, you think, oh, well, it's going to be horrible because of their leaving. Yes, that's one of the things that's going to be very hard. But for certain people who God has been talking to and God is becoming friends with, and God is giving them blueprints and strategies and pouring down insight on the next era and what their part is in it, their fear is going to be very unique. They are going to look around and see so many people dying that they will think there's going to be nobody left to build. You have taken away, it looks like, everybody who would even be a part of moving your agenda forward. This is going to be a giant fear of the people God is actually working with. Now, this is when you need to have a different level of checking your temperature spiritually. Because if you entertain that thought that there's nobody left and there's nothing, like, what's the point of preparing these blueprints, because it looks like there's going to be nobody to even help. Because I don't care who you are, you cannot erect a palace by yourself with your own hands and your own brain and your own mind, your own spirit. You can't do it. You need people. So if you fall into that kind of despair in a situation like this, which the enemy will bring to you, because remember, he's only after stopping your preparation. If you fall into that, you'll stop preparing because you'll think, what's the point? Or you'll have a horribly hard time moving forward with God and listening to him, because he'll be talking to you about opposite things. He's going to say, yeah, I ordered this and I understand how you feel about it, but you're going to have to trust my relationship with you and know that if I'm preparing something with you, it will be built. And I have the people to build it. I don't care what it looks like to you. In fact, God will actually ask you to build in situations where it doesn't look like anything is even possible. He'll ask you to prepare with him in situations that it looks like you are a complete idiot. And even you yourself will think, I'm a total fool to be preparing in this situation. Not only that, Satan will come to you and say, you are evil and wicked to be thinking about God's preparations when there's so much carnage all over the earth. How selfish of you. No, it's not, because you're working for God and his purpose, because he is an afterwards. So this is when you check your temperature. And in this situation, you need to make sure that you're feeling inside of yourself when you're starting to go in that direction, and you need to stop it as soon as possible. In fact, if there's anything that is attached to that feeling, moving in that negative direction, you need to shut it down. I'll give you an example for this specific thing. You're watching the news, you're seeing carnage. You are seeing body bags and crazy, it looks like the world's ending. And then you start feeling that dread, and then you start getting discouraged in your preparation with God. You need to turn off the TV, because that is checking your temperature. You need to stop watching that stuff. Maybe you need to shut your windows and shut everything down and start preparing with God. I don't care if you have to shut yourself in a room. This checking your temperature is also with people in your relationships. I don't care who it is. It doesn't matter. It could be your wife. It could be your husband. It could be your girlfriend. It could be your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your uncle. It makes no difference. Grandmother. Who's higher than God? Who is that? Nobody. Who's more important than his purpose? Nobody. I am not saying that you neglect people and treat them evil and be wicked towards them. What I'm saying is, if the enemy is coming through somebody that you love in any kind of way, whether it's their mouth, or whether it's they're sick, or they're dying, or they passed. If the enemy comes to you with that and wants you to stop building God's stuff, you need to rebuke that. Because many times the enemy will come to you with something that seems righteous. Some of the craziest attacks that you will ever get in your life will be attacks that make you feel like you're right and feel like, oh, this is the good thing to do and the good thing to feel. It's right. I should feel like this, and it should make me stop doing this because I'm a human. No, absolutely not. Make sure you check your temperature. For example, if a family member you love is dying, and while that's happening, the enemy's coming to you and making you stop listening to God, or trying to turn your head away and your ear away from him. That is an attack. And I don't care what you have to do, you need to make sure you listen to God. Even if it means hanging up the phone. It must be done. Because if not, that person's course is their course. There's nothing you can do about that. The only thing you can do is be obedient to God. That's it. And that would be a situation where you need to check your temperature. You need to trust God that He is going to handle the people around you how they need to be handled in whatever situation, and that your circumstances will be handled however He needs them to be handled. In fact, you staying working on God's preparation and His blueprints and listening to His voice and getting your relationship stronger with Him, even in the crisis, will actually cover you because you're in God's will. It will cover certain problems you think you're having. Either the problem will be removed or the problem will not affect you. Because let me tell you something. If somebody is going to go through something and say you're going to lose a family member, you're going to lose them. There's nothing you can do about that. You need to come out with treasure. It could be in any sense of losing. It could be a death or a total cutting and a removal where you're not even associated with them. It doesn't matter. You need treasure out of that. Now, there is short-term temperature check in the spirit and long-term. You need the short-term for the day-to-day things that come up that are routine, that distract you, that terrorize you, that depress you, that break your heart. There's day-to-day things. You need to check your temperature and make sure that you're staying away from anything that's going to deter you from working with God. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is long-term temperature check, because builders are going to need this. This is for people who are actually going to be working with God in the long term, that are really going to need to maintain consistency. You are going to need to check your temperature long term. Now, how you do that is intentional. When you're checking your temperature and the other stuff I'm saying, it's part of it is a defense, because you don't know what's going to happen. There's the horrible things that come. Sometimes you don't know when they're coming, and you have to actually have a defense and check your temperature. But this is an offensive action that God will expect you to do. He will do this especially with your energy. How the way you're going to need a certain amount of energy to do God's purpose and do God's preparation in your life. You're going to need it. And you're going to need to manage the energy that He's given you. You need to know how much energy He's actually given you and how much energy He's allotted to each thing that He's assigned for you. How do you know that? This is the danger of going so full force on one thing that maybe He had 5 other things that He needed done, and now you dropped 5 and overdid one thing. How do you do it? How do you find this out? You do long-term temperature checks. You do tests. For example, if God has asked you to prepare a blueprint for Him in this coming crisis that the world is about to go in, that we're heading into this crisis, if he's asked you to prepare something through that time, you need to see how he wants you to prepare. How much time does he want you to put to that each day while you're tending to human things at the same time? So let's say that he wants you to prepare something. Let's just say a drawing. Let's say he wants you to draw a palace. If you spend all day drawing that palace, and he wanted you to actually spend 5 hours helping somebody, telling them about Christ, then you didn't properly manage your energy. Or you spent all day doing it and now you're exhausted. You just worked all night. And you worked all night and you worked all night for 3 weeks. Now you are totally exhausted, crushed, and you are out of commission for a month after that. Because remember, it's not human energy you're using. You're using God's energy, so you're going to need to know how much he's allotted you and when he wants to use it. Because with God's stuff, you cannot just press through as much as you want and think that you're just going to be okay. No, you're going to be out of commission. You are going to be exhausted, and your spirit's going to be weak. And not only are you going to not be able to build, but now you're more susceptible to attacks because you're so tired. So what you need to do is you need to test it. You need to start with something reasonable. You need to say, okay, I'm going to do as much as I think I can consistently. And then when I check my temperature and I feel after a week, I'm getting tired. And I'm doing God's work. I can feel in my spirit feels like I'm starting to not like this. And it's something I love. Then you need to pull it back a little bit because that's God saying, listen, you're doing something you love. You're doing my purpose. You are preparing through crisis. And you checked your temperature. And I told you, you need to scale back on that a little bit because I need you to not just last for a month. You don't know how long this is going to last for. I need you to last through 8 months consistently. So what this is you're always checking, you're always testing and feeling your inside, saying, which is the thing that made me feel like this? And I need to stay away from that. I need to pull back. Sooner than later. That's what you're doing. A lot of people, when we're talking about this topic, they move forward in things that are not good for them. And then they want to run to God when they're in the crisis mode themselves and run to God and he just have this emergency situation or this emergency fix. And God's like, well, this is not a real emergency. This is not a real emergency because you should have checked your temperature a week ago on this and known that this is not the direction where you should have gone. You should have pulled back and you would have not been in this situation. So my intention is in speaking to you about this is not only it's not only to survive, to build, and of course get your relationship with God stronger, even through crisis, come out with treasure. It's so that you don't find yourself always asking God to pull you out of emergency situations that really are not emergency, that you actually threw yourself into. You need to start becoming wise. You need to start looking and seeing, how do I keep getting in this situation over and over again? Why do I keep having this kind of anxiety? Why do I keep having this kind of fear? This fear is not leaving me. You need to start checking your temperature in that and saying, I'm going to start paying meticulous attention to this side of me, this part of me. You need to find the source, identify it, and eradicate it. And make sure you check your temperature on that specific thing over and over again until it's not a problem for you anymore. One of the reasons why this is very, very important to not waste energy on false emergencies that are because you are actually just walking into these certain anxieties and fears and anything else, the list goes on, is because when you waste energy on those things, a lot of the times Satan's strategy might not even be that thing that you are stressed out about or afraid of. That is not necessarily the thing. A lot of the times what the enemy does is he wants you to waste your energy on lesser level battles that God never asked you to fight. Because the enemy has a bigger battle coming that he knows you have to fight. That you're going to need all your energy for. And God knows that this battle is coming that you're going to have to fight. So God is going to help you check your temperature and manage that energy so that you're not fighting these petty battles that you are walking into. And you can actually destroy the real giant that's coming. And that's what Satan does not want you to know. In fact, my camera just randomly turned off. Just right now, just turned off, and the enemy wanted me to forget this point for you. So now I'm really determined to make sure that you get this. Now, there are giant battles coming your way. Huge battles that you cannot avoid. These battles you are not going to be able to just frivolously fight and just fight however you want. You're going to need absolute strategy from the Holy Spirit to help you and ensure that you defeat this enemy that's coming. Now, this enemy that's coming, a big part of this attack is to get you to lay down your relationship with Christ, put it aside, and battle. This is what God's telling me to tell you guys. This attack is not even about the giant. This specific attack I'm talking about. This attack is over God's relationship with you and His blueprints and the purposes on your life. That if you even turn to fight this enemy, you will lose. Even if you defeat this enemy or you feel like you beat it, and you don't finish God's blueprints, and you stop hearing God, you absolutely will lose everything. Now, how do you avoid this giant enemy that God just told me is definitely coming? Specifically that. You check your temperature. In fact, for the people who are ordained to survive this giant purging crisis that is going to cover our earth, and those who God has actually chosen to survive His sword that's coming through, that nobody can escape unless they repent. For those people, the enemy is going to use this crisis to try to make you turn away from God and to stop your purpose and not even be aware of it maybe. So I want to encourage whoever's watching this now or later, you need to make sure when you get hit hard, and I'm talking about unbearably hard where you think you can't even, you're going to die in 2 seconds. I'm not going to make it. That's how you feel. I'm not even going to make it out of this minute. When you feel like that, you need to run towards God immediately. Because what's going to come out of this is giant revelation for you. Giant purpose. Beautiful strategies with God that He's going to usher you as one of the leaders in this coming era. So make sure you check your temperature at all times. Start practicing now. Check your temperature now on things that you need to do right now that He's pointing out because He's going to be training you. You need to start training to check your temperature. You don't want to wait for the big giant to check your temperature because that's going to come too quick. If you haven't checked your temperature then, by that point, it's going to be even more difficult to not fight. Because a lot of the times a battle is not fighting. God will ask you not to fight how you want to fight. And that's the best strategy to defeat the enemy. So just make sure you're checking your temperature. The rewards for this are unbelievable. And I know there are people he has marked that will absolutely experience the treasure and the peace that comes out of consistently checking your temperature, short term and long term. Your relationship with God will flourish faster than you can even imagine through this principle. You will build wonders. You will prepare blueprints that you can't even talk to anybody about because they're so unbelievable. You will have insight on things you shouldn't even know about. He will give you wisdom on things that you have no training for. He will give you gifts and talents you didn't even know you had. He will expose those things. He will reveal them to you. This all comes from checking your temperature. But the biggest thing I have to say is peace. Because God operates from a place of peace. And if you can check your temperature and if all you get is peace alone, you have everything. Because then you can hear everything. And you can have the vision that you need to do what God is asking you to do. Now it's difficult, but it can be done. And you can do it very, very well. And He will help you through it. He will be right there holding your hand. Because remember, there is nobody that wants you to succeed in His purpose more and succeed in your life and in your relationship with God than God Himself. Hail Jehovah.